Peace, peace, and welcome. Glad you're here.
What's up?
This is the
Thank you.
Cook on Quarantine podcast. I am here with one of the most important education policymakers of a generation. The pride of Baltimore. Uh,
Okay. Okay.
the intellectual, the the hero.
All right now. All right. You I'll take that. That pride of Baltimore got my heart. That's what I'm
Yeah,
like. Okay, okay.
yeah, yeah. Um, Mr. Brooks, thank you for doing Cook on Quarantine. It's good to have you here.
Thank you so much for inviting me. It's good to see somebody uh, and be in compliance with the rules and regulations
There you go.
of the land.
There
So
you go. It already messed up, huh?
yeah, yeah. It's let's see.
There you go. I'm back. Can you hear
I can hear you. Yeah.
me? Yeah. A standard glitch, that I've been experiencing throughout these podcasts. Wait, you're it's pronounced Daryl. Durrell.
Durrell.
Durrell. So Durryle Brooks is on the Board of Education in Baltimore, and
Yes.
we got the opportunity to meet briefly at a conference in DC. I haven't had the pleasure of actually going to Baltimore, but I'm excited to kind of hear about your story, about what's happening in Baltimore around the quarantine. Uh,
Yeah.
so, so yeah, we'll hop right into it. Just before, is it in Baltimore? Are you called a commissioner or a trustee or what is it?
Commissioner.
Okay,
Yeah.
okay, we're also
Board
commissioner.
commissioner.
Yeah,
Okay.
okay. And so, how long have you been elected in Baltimore?
So actually, we are not elected. We're appointed.
Oh, my bad.
Um,
bad.
and so I got appointed last August. And that's a whole different process. I know it's different for each city or a large educational agency versus some of the other states. It just depends on where you are. But
Mm,
for right now, we're just appointed.
okay.
Um,
Is it
yeah.
always been that way, or is it change, or
Um, I think
you
there's always been an appointment process. Now, who does the appointing has changed since I can remember. So, at one point, it was the mayor who had full control. Then the state, doing some historical stuff, took over city schools. Then the governor did the appointing, and then maybe my time frame is a little bit off. I'd probably say within the last 5 years, maybe a little bit longer, went back to the mayor doing the appointment, uh, with the nomination of that process being led by a group of community agencies doing all of the vetting. So the
okay,
NAACP, our Center, civil rights organizations across the city, and for the city of Baltimore itself, um, you know, working class groups um, for unions. So the community panel is the institute. So when I went through, it was about 30 people in a room from all
mhm,
different organizations. Um,
mhm.
you know, grilling you about
Yeah,
what you're interested in and why you want to run, and or not even run, but why do you want to sort of serve in this capacity for the city of Baltimore? Um, yeah, that's kind of the gist of our process.
okay, okay. How many people are on the Baltimore Board of Education?
Yeah, so we have 9 full voting members, and we also have a student commissioner.
Mhm,
And so the student commissioner role, which um, pisses me off a little bit because they don't vote for every single thing. So there's some stipulations on what they can vote for. But nonetheless, we have some student voice. And I think for places like, I think for all educational boards or any kind of community board or whatever, even for profit, I feel like we need student voice. So I'd actually like that to be more than one student representing. in our space. But currently, that's what we have allotted.
Okay. Yeah, I think people are going to learn a lot. And for the people that from your network that watch this, I mean, I know about our board. Our board is elected. It's 7 members. We have 2 student delegates, and one is voted on by the student body. There's high school students, like all high schools collectively, and the other is it comes from an advisory council. They're appointed from an advisory council called the Student Advisory Council. So 9 members, 1 delegate. Are there 4-year terms, or how does it?
Yeah, so we do 2 3-year terms, but you have at your third. Once your first term is up, essentially you get a choice. You get to decide to stay on, and if you decide to stay on, then you might get like a small sort of ceremony to kind of acknowledge that you'll be on again. But generally, you might just decide you want to dip out because it's too much for free. So we don't even get a stipend.
Yeah, are you stipended also? Like, what is that?
No, man, nothing.
Stipend, no.
All volunteer. All. How do I describe it? Like, so we usually average, I'd say, between 15 20 hours a week, depending on sort of like what's going on between our actual board meetings and our committee work. But then, like, seriously, like, so there's just stuff to read and go through. And like, I sit on the policy committee, so we got policies to review, and on our strategic planning committee. So there's just a lot of stuff that's going on that we got to attend to on a regular basis. And it's free. So, I don't know too many people who can volunteer 20 hours of of their time, which is, I think, is one of the challenges for having an elected board. An appointed board with no stipend. Granted, I feel like we should get stipends, but that's a whole nother issue. But I think for families or people who are interested in serving in the public in this capacity, like, if you're not giving folks, it is the reason why I can do my job and give up 20 hours during the week where we're meeting traditionally like during work hours, is because I'm faculty, right? So my job allows me the flexibility to go to a meeting at noon, 1 o'clock. But if you have a traditional 9 to 5 job, this is going to be hard work for you. And then on top of that, then figuring out, like, how do you even manage an additional 20 hours when, the type of job that you have might sort of not be as flexible with sort of the demands of the volunteer role. So I'm very fortunate in that respect to be able to serve. And I think there's a lot of privilege that comes with who actually can serve that I think needs to be interrogated more often.
Yeah, no, that's definitely on point. And it's the same thing here, because I tell people, the way that I explain this is, my dad drives for our local transit agency. It's called Muni. And
I live in San Francisco.
Oh yeah. Well, people don't know. What's it called out there? What's the transit out there called?
The MTA, Mass Transit. Yeah,
okay.
So it's called the MTA.
Okay. Yeah, so my dad drives for Muni, and if you're a Muni driver, running for school board, like, campaigning during the day,
right?
And then all the stuff that comes, even if you wanted to, schools operate during the day, so even after you run, right, having the flexibility to actually leave work to go to a school site to engage or talk to people who work at the central office, all of it, being on the school board really only caters to a person that has a certain type of lifestyle, and that's problematic. On top of the fact that it's discouraging because you spend this time and you covering your living expenses is going to be a barrier.
Right, that's real.
But you don't want to hear us gripe about our school board walls. Let's get into your story. Were you raised in Baltimore?
Yes, I'm a Baltimore kid. So I have this deep affinity and appreciation for my town. And so, and I call it a town, even though we're a city, But like having lived in San Francisco and other major cities, it feels small. Baltimore is like a bunch of neighborhoods. I think we have something like over 200 neighborhoods, ranging in sizes. And it just feels, when I finished my PhD, it was just really nice to come home. And so I was just like, every time I flew from Bradley International Airport, home from school to back to Baltimore and BWI, you just see that lining when I just knew I was home, and my heart just was like, it felt renewed in a way that like I knew that I needed to come home. So I'm kind of obsessed with Baltimore. Like, I think it's probably one of the best places to live. I know for folks listening, y'all might not agree, but for someone that's born and raised here, it's actually a pretty cool gem.
Yeah. So. What are some of the things that, if you could put your finger on, describe like that make you proud to be there?
So I mean, like, I think because we're a city of neighborhoods, I think generally folks show up for each other, and and of course that's going to be to varying degrees throughout the city depending on where you are. I particularly live in I would say a hyperactive community. And so we're always looking out for each other. So when this sort of quarantine situation happened, folks were already on the ground organizing, how do we get groceries to our neighbors who are elderly, or who might have complications that might make them more susceptible to COVID-19. And so how do we do that with some integrity? And then how do we use our older school buildings or community spaces to make sure that folks have food generally. So just community members. So I think that's something that really inspires me, because folks they just was like, well, something needs to get done, and they began to do it. I think also Baltimore is just very beautiful. Like we're old ass city, right? So like the buildings are old. We have some beautiful architecture. And because Baltimore has been historically like blue collar, working class town. I think what was beautiful about it was that there's this level of ruggedness that which is probably born out of my affinity for it is because I lived through it. That feels kind of refreshing. So folks don't seem as pretentious as other places that I've been or lived. And I think just because we're on the we're kind of Southern. Folks are generally a little bit nicer. Not as nice as folks from California, but generally nicer than folks from DC or New York. So I think, don't come for me, y'all. So, I just.
New York definitely has a reputation for being kind of, brazen. I found, I don't know, but maybe when I was younger, I didn't really like DC because, like when I was a young professional in my early 20s, because there was such a high emphasis on where you worked, like, oh, what do you do? But circling back around this time when I just got there, I was like, man, this place is like, I really enjoyed it. I was like, this place is black, it's beautiful. It's not as black as it used to be.
Right, that's
but compared to San Francisco, I was like, there's hella black people here.
There's hella black people. Yeah.
Baltimore, let's get into that. Let's talk about like, a lot of these. I feel like my cookout quarantine is like Black History Month again. I'm just talking to like Black excellence from all over the place. Like I had the lady Danielle Belton on. She's the editor-in-chief of The Root. I think I told you about the other day. So Black Baltimore, like the story of gentrification is happening in multiple cities. Like what's going on around Baltimore on that topic, and what is this Black population sort of consist of right now?
Yeah, so Baltimore has been, dubbed as a chocolate city. We have consistently had a population, I'd say about 65% Black. And so I think we'll see what happens with this new census that comes out. But I think we're still probably about, maybe about 63% Black folks. And I think that number sort of has stayed consistent partly because of some gentrification, but when you start to dig into Baltimore's history of redlining and sort of like displacement of folks, like, because Baltimore is deeply racist. It was, if you looked at the historical context of the city, we had a high proportion of free Blacks back in the day, right? That wasn't normal, and yet that we live in this contradiction that there was also enslavement pens at the same Inner Harbor that we go to, and it's touted as one of our core features of attraction. But I think sort of what that really meant for the policy landscape and sort of how things began to shift in Baltimore is that where they were actually sending Black people in, they were also, of course, that meant that there were a lack of resources that were going there. So the places that we've seen flip recently, like the areas a part of folks who are familiar with North Avenue of Baltimore, that was an area that was traditionally Black, also meant that it didn't have access to a lot of resources. Now, all of a sudden, folks came in, it's rebranded as, Station North, our arts district. You get these great restaurants starting to pop up in places. Not to say we don't need an art district, but that also meant that folks are being displaced. Mm-hmm. And so I think like trying to deal with that sort of dichotomy of our existence, where folks who have been here for really long periods of time, and then the fact that some people think that in order to have good things, that it has to be gentrified. It shouldn't be like that. I don't think we have to live in that sort of duality. Like, we have a lot of Black artists here. We have a lot of strong Black working class families, strong Black poor families, right? Because I keep reminding folks, just because you're poor don't mean that you're somehow inefficient or defective or or somehow lacking inherently in character or quality. No, like we have folks who are committed to their families, trying to make a living, trying to do what's right for not only their communities, but the city at large. And I think in addition to a pretty substantial middle class Black, mm-hmm. I'd say historically a community as well. So I struggle with the piece around gentrification because unfortunately it means that folks are just kind of being moved and shifted around into communities that don't have a lot of resources. So mm-hmm. we're not spared. Mm-hmm. And I think that's kind of just the reality of life across, I think, many major cities. Mm-hmm. And it's messed up.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's also, I mean, this you see this story play out in these historic Black cities, and as someone at the forefront of, like yourself, on the forefront of trying to prepare, a new generation to take the helm and lead the city and just participate in a very beneficial way, right? Like as community members or what have you. Something that we have to pay attention to with the public school system in Baltimore. I was looking at some of the stats, like all the what urban school districts. We talked about this in DC, I think, briefly when we met. But many urban school districts often struggle with, the opportunity gap, like low test scores. San Francisco does. There's a lot more African American students in Baltimore, and it's so talk a little bit about like some of the great things happening in Baltimore public schools, some of the challenges that you're facing.
Yeah, so I mean, I think right now I get to serve at a time when I feel like the cards are starting to fall in line, right? We have a wonderful CEO in leadership who has a vision, particularly our focus on restorative practice and social and emotional learning that was not here, I'd say, 10, 15 years ago. And so we have the local players through our community partners pushing restorative practice and restorative justice, social emotional learning. We have now sort of internal leadership pushing that. And I think as we begin to see on the board that we're all in agreement that those are priorities in terms of like actually addressing some of the long systemic issues around academic achievement in Baltimore City. So that really makes me excited. That doesn't mean that everything's going well, or that you know, if I wasn't on the Zoom with you, I wouldn't say a whole bunch of other things that to point out some of the challenges and the kinks. But I think by and large, I feel like for the task that at hand for a community like Baltimore that has, for the children have been systemically underfunded and underinvested in, leadership that sees them as important, valuable, deserving, and then willing to put their time and energy in to get that money and the resources reinvested in them. I think you can't underestimate that. And so I'm really proud to serve at this particular moment in time because I get to weigh in on that. I get to say, yeah, I love all my kids in Baltimore City, all of my students, my scholars. Now tell me a little bit about sort of like how we're making sure that the Black LGBT kids are taken care of, the Black kids with disabilities are taken care of. So I get to begin to deepen the analysis so that the students who've been historically falling through the cracks, right? Because there's just this, if we look at all students and then you start to look in layers and you go deeper and deeper and deeper, you get to find wider and wider disparities. And so what's going on with our large or emerging immigrant community? How are we taking care of them? Are we doing right by our Latino students primarily? But we have a whole bunch of different students from a lot of different countries. Folks are coming in as refugees or immigrating to Baltimore. And like, how is a district being responsive to that? So I feel like at this particular moment in time, there's a lot of opportunity, but that means that there's also a lot of work to do to address some of those gaps. When I think about sort of, you know, why those gaps have persisted. So I mentioned that the underfunding. If you begin to look at some of the Baltimore literature around education, you'll begin to find that there was, after this recession, I believe in 2008, maybe a little bit before that, there was a dip in funding for students and the system broadly, but that meant for, you know, each dollar amount for student decreased. That money never increased after the recession was over. So when we were looking at some reports, because we were back in this funding, this particular historic moment for Baltimore, which is the Kerwin Commission, which was to try to get a massive infusion of money to rebuild not only the infrastructure, because Baltimore has some of the oldest school buildings in the country, but then we also have systemically underfunded district. And so through the work of the Kerwin Commission, we were really trying to get billions of dollars reinvested into Maryland broadly, but then a large part of that would come to Baltimore because we're the largest educational agency in the state. Right. So we're working with, you know, at this point, 80,000 students. And so a lot of the
80,000 students. What's the annual budget for the district?
So I think we're about 1.5 billion.
Okay.
Might be a little more. We haven't seen these new numbers.
I didn't mean track. Yeah.
No. Yeah, for real. So it's kind of like, so when as I kind of go back and like do my stuff, right? And so looking at the policy landscape of Baltimore, you know, we had mayors, you know, setting up some racial segregation ordinances, you know, that were adopted by folks across the country, like in the early 19th century, rather 20th century. And so, you know, the redlining I mentioned, we have some great resources that looked at sort of where folks were lending and where were they sending folks to, and particularly Black folks in terms of communities. And when you begin to just look at how all of those compounding things shape up, that means that basically for generations, you have had Black folks and their young people growing up in a space that was never really funded appropriately. partly because they weren't even supposed to be educated. So, I mean, at one point we had two different districts, a district for the Black kids and a district for the white kids. And so, I think we're trying to recover from some of that larger historic systemic stuff. But then also some of the more contemporary issues that we're facing around, displacement of whole communities in Baltimore City, sort of the tearing down of particular projects and what that does to sort of communities and families. And, of course, the war on drugs was huge here. So a lot of folks were imprisoned. And so all of that matters when you think about the wholeness of a young person and them trying to access their highest level of academic achievement, and beyond that, their highest level of humanity. And I think, unfortunately, a lot of that's been robbed of students, particularly Black students in Baltimore City.
Yeah. New Orleans is my favorite city.
And, same here.
Actually, no, from San Francisco. New Orleans is my favorite city. My bad. And New Orleans is another city that is like 60% or over 60% African American. New Orleans also, similar to Baltimore, has had like these issues happen around their mayors getting into trouble. Like same things happen like in DC. And like no city mayor is immune from like running into something around whatever. And it made me also think about like Newark. And I was thinking like is with when Cory Booker came to Newark, there was like all this new attention around this sort of like academically elite person coming in to like say Baltimore, or to Newark. I'm sorry.
Newark.
Do you think that the city of Baltimore is like looking for that type of leadership? Like, what is that's sort of like there's a lot in that question, but
yeah. So honestly,
what's going on with the political landscape in Baltimore? Like I remember, like with the brother that passed,
Freddie Gray,
and you had the DA that had a lot of national headlines.
Oh, well, that could be any number of people. So.
Well, she was speaking out against like holding charges against the officers that.
Yeah, that's pretty great.
Yeah. And what was the woman's name that?
Marilyn Mosby.
Okay. Yeah. So what's going on in Baltimore around like the political stuff? It's like.
Yeah. So from my perspective, having grown up in Baltimore City, what's become clear to me is that everyday folks should not expect that their governments will save them. And this is me, it might sound a little critical. I'm critical and cynical. I think I think folks in this city deserve exemplary leaders. And at the same time, folks have to take care of themselves. And that's why I'm so proud of the community initiatives that self-initiated across the city. And we also have some dope folks in the city leadership who are all about the people and trying to get them access to the resources and vital things that they need. I just think, so for example, we're up for mayor's run, new mayor to be selected. In my mind, I think it's a thankless job. Honestly, I feel like, my time looking at systems, large systems, bureaucratic systems, it's very hard. They're hard to manage. And it requires so much energy and insight. I think with folks who I'm looking for this next round of leadership in the city, I want them to be a little bit younger. I want them to come from a perspective that's a little more creative and less traditional. One of the things that I think Baltimore is gifted, many of us who grew up here, is sort of this let's play it safe mentality. And I think I don't think that's where we are anymore. I feel like our challenges are really complex, and I feel like we need a different kind of leadership. And for me, that means a vision, way forward. I think that means that we need someone who's big goals, who are really trying to do some big things. Because when you try to do big things, when it gets through the bureaucracy, it'll be a much more condensed version of what you try to do anyway. So I need y'all to go all out. But I don't think people in Baltimore are looking for a savior. I think that ship has sailed. And I think what people are looking for is honest and leadership with integrity. And I don't know what it is about a political process. And God knows, if you look across this country, corruption seems to be at every turn. So I don't think we're particularly unique in sort of corruption or anything like that. But I don't know that there might be something in how political work is done, or the types of alliances that sort of might predispose folks to make some decisions that are questionable, and sometimes put their constituents in harm's way. And so, that's kind of my take on it. I feel like at this point, what I want for us is, I want clear leadership. I want honest, authentic creators, innovators, folks who are they're willing to take some challenges, and more transparency and accountability. And I think if we can get those two things, I think we actually doing pretty well as a city.
Yeah. And and I don't want to see Baltimore become a part of a discussion where they need that either. I think that was sort of the point I was trying to get at, is that I know a lot of incredible people are coming out that city, and because of the headlines, it could be like this place where an opportunist is looking to come in and like take over or whatever. We're approaching the top of the hour, and I do want to. It was so much. Maybe we should do a part 2 at some point, because there's like a lot of that I wanted to unpack. Because I've never been.
Yeah,
I want to go, and I'm so intrigued by.
I will make sure you're taken care of when you do show up on this post. Okay.
One of my close friends from college actually lives in Baltimore, and he works in city government. I forget the agency now, but yeah. So we're in shelter in place. We're in quarantine. What has it been like for you? Like, how are you like adjusting?
Yeah, for real. So I think it's hard. As an introvert, I was good for like 2 weeks, because I'm used to like just having like my small community of folks around me, spending lots of time in the house anyway. I'm also a gamer, so like this is a great time to be on my game downstairs just playing without interruption or judgment. And so, but honestly, like, the dynamic is different, right? So usually I could go out, sit at a coffee shop and just do my thing, even if I'm not even engaging with folks. Now that's really hard. So I think what our neighbors have done is, so because we are in row houses, every maybe week or so, we're coming out for happy hour, because there's plenty of distance between us. Mm-hmm. And we're still building community. We're still engaging and supporting one another. I think the mental health toll, though, is just real. And so, I'm having to like, I was just trying to get my fitness back on, and, and then they were like, oops, the gym's closed. And so I'm like, yo, like, what's up with that? And so like all my little muscles gone. I'm like through all of this, these phases and changes. And that's a toll, because what I discovered later in life, that I go to exercise for my mental health and less about sort of what my body looks like. Both, they should be in good condition, but like, so like now I've been able to like, I've been having to make time to make sure that I go for a run. I went to the track. We have a reservoir and it has a track around it. Just took some pictures as I was running of just like beautiful spring stuff, like a beautiful flower. And then what I've been realizing is that a lot lately that during times of crisis, personally and internally, in order for me to stay grounded, I also need to stay in ritual. And so what are the things that I do religiously? And that's not in a spiritual way, but in a way that means repetitiously, that somehow grounds me. And a part of that is going outside and running. And then also that will also be gardening once it's warm enough to be outside, and making sure that I lean into all of the things that make me feel more connected and less disconnected, even though I can't be physically close to the people that I want to anymore. So
yeah, I was gonna ask you if you had a routine. It sounds like, do you have a daily routine, like a morning routine or anything like that, or is that?
yeah, so the only thing that I can commit to right now is like trying to leave the house to do a run, like every couple of days.
Yeah.
But I think it will shift when I have to go into the garden, in which case it's every morning I'm going out in the water to pull weeds and to get ready for springtime.
Mm-hmm. Do you have a book recommendation?
Ooh, let's see. I think at this time, like the first book that always comes to my mind is All About Love by Bell Hooks.
Okay.
And that was what my dissertation research was about, love specifically. And
what's your PhD in?
Education.
Okay.
But
you know, Commissioner, Doctor.
Yeah, but it was
my bad.
No, no, you know, so but it was about love from a black queer context. And so so when I think about a time now when I need to feel and re-envision what love looks like for us as a community, as a people, I kind of look to that book for guidance. And I think for me, it just kind of settles my soul in a way that I think I need right now.
Do you have a music recommendation?
Oh my God. So my homeboy from Cali just put me on to Doja Cat. Didn't know who she was.
Oh, okay. I think I seen it on Spotify. I don't know her stuff though. I'm gonna check it out.
Yo, I'm feeling it. So I'm like, okay, when I'm running outside, that's what I'm listening to right now, Doja Cat.
Okay. Do you have a motto?
A motto. Let's see. Well, usually I try to give myself every year a new motto. I don't know. So I got a tattoo that says, live from your heart, lead with love, and your soul shall not know the sting of regret. And so that's kind of what I live by every single day, and try to be my best version of myself, even when we're not in a pandemic.
Right. That's what's up. So yeah, thank you, Durryle Brooks, Commissioner, Doctor.
Thank you.
So I run a company called the Luther Harris Holding Company. We do strategic advising, diversity recruitment, and relationship building for other institutions. You can find me on Twitter at Stevon Cook, on Instagram at Stevon Cook, StevonCook.com. How do they get a hold of you?
Folks can find me on like Instagram if you want to see me. It's just Dr. Dr_Durryle, which is my first name. That's Durryle. Or you can actually go to www.durryle.com, and you can see sort of what I do, sort of my areas of expertise, sort of what I do in the community. Just kind of do that front-facing page that kind of tell you a little bit about me. And of course, you can send an email to me through Durryle.com as well.
Okay.
Sweet.
Dr. Brooks.
Thank you so much for the time. I appreciate this. And we definitely need to do a part 2. And I also need to connect with you just to hear more about your experience living in San Francisco as a Black man. Because I have stories about what that's like.
Yeah. I should. Yeah, we should definitely do that.